Imagine for a second that you broke your leg, just completely snapped it. You're lying on the sidewalk in agony. Do you hide it? Do you pretend you're just resting? Do you tell yourself that asking for a doctor is a sign of moral failure? Of course not. You scream for help. You get a cast. You heal. But when the fracture is inside, when it's anxiety or depression or just this crushing weight of loneliness, we do the exact opposite. We go silent.
And that silence is physically dangerous. We tend to think of silence as neutral, as just the absence of noise. But biologically, keeping quiet about emotional pain is an active stressor. It floods the body with cortisol. It keeps your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, stuck in the on position.
It's the paradox of the modern condition. We are theoretically more connected than ever, yet the data is screaming that we are isolating ourselves to death. Welcome to the show. Today we are looking at the mechanics of reaching out, why we don't do it, why our brains desperately need us to, and how to break through that paralysis. I'm joined by Rachel to dissect the anatomy of this silence.
It's good to be here, Jake, and you mentioned the data screaming. It really is. If you look at the 2024 statistics from Mental Health America, nearly 60 million adults in the U.S. experienced a mental illness in the past year. That is roughly 1 in 5 people. But here's the kicker. Almost 6 in 10 of them received no treatment. 0.
6 in 10. That is a staggering gap between suffering and solution. If 60% of people with broken legs didn't go to the hospital, we would call it a humanitarian crisis. Why is the barrier so high for the mind?
It stems from how we view the function of pain. With physical pain, the signal is clear. Damage requires repair. With emotional pain, we have centuries of cultural baggage telling us that the pain is the defect. We don't see it as a signal. We see it as a character flaw.
We treat the symptom as an identity. I am anxious versus I have a broken leg.
Precisely. And historically, this has deep roots. If you go back to the Middle Ages, mental distress wasn't a health issue. It was a spiritual failing or even demonic possession. You were morally compromised. Then we moved into the asylum era of the 19th and 20th centuries, where the solution was isolation, removing the defective person from society. We might think we are past that, but the residual programming is still there. We still fear that admitting we aren't okay signals a fundamental brokenness.
That programming seems especially lethal for men. I was reading a report from the CDC regarding suicide rates in 2022, and the disparity is jarring. The rate for males was nearly 4 times higher than for females. It feels like there is a specific cultural silence imposed on men.
The silent epidemic, as it is often called. The statistics on this are heartbreaking. A survey by the Priory Group found that 40% of men have never spoken to anyone about their mental health. Not a doctor, not a partner, not a friend. 40%. And the primary reasons given were embarrassment and the fear of a negative stigma.
So almost half the male population is white-knuckling it through life. That isn't just a social issue. That is a public health emergency. When you bottle that up, where does it go? It doesn't vanish.
It manifests somatically. It turns into high blood pressure, heart disease, chronic inflammation. The U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, released an advisory recently that compared the mortality risk of loneliness to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Think about that. Loneliness is as dangerous to your arteries as a pack-a-day smoking habit. It increases the risk of heart disease by 29% and stroke by 32%.
That comparison to smoking is useful because it takes the emotion out of it. It makes it mechanical. If you are lonely, your body is degrading faster. But I want to push back on the why. We know it's bad for us. We know we should talk. But in the moment, at 2 a.m. when you're spiraling, reaching for the phone feels impossible. What is happening in the brain that makes that bridge so hard to cross?
That is the cruelty of the condition. Depression and profound anxiety attack the very mechanism you need to heal, your executive function and your social drive. The anterior cingulate cortex, which helps process social connection, gets dampened. You are biologically wired to retreat when you are wounded, like an animal hiding in a cave to avoid predators. But for humans, that instinct backfires. We are obligate social species. We don't survive in the cave alone.
So the instinct to hide is a survival mechanism that has become maladaptive. We are trying to protect ourselves from judgment, but we are actually starving ourselves of the cure.
Exactly. You can think of social connection like a biological thirst. When you are dehydrated, your body screams for water. Loneliness is your brain screaming for connection. But unlike thirst, where you just drink, loneliness comes with shame. You feel like you shouldn't need it, or that needing it makes you weak.
Let's talk about the reception side of this. Say someone actually works up the nerve to break that silence. They turn to a friend or a partner. Often, the person listening panics. They think they need to fix it. They start offering solutions. Have you tried yoga? Maybe you need a new job. And that shuts the conversation down immediately.
Right, because the person sharing isn't looking for a consultant, they are looking for a witness. They need someone to acknowledge the weight they are carrying. Neuroscience shows that simply naming an emotion, a process called affect labeling, reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Just saying, "I am terrified" or "I am sad" physically calms the brain. But if the listener immediately pivots to "here is how to fix it," they validate the idea that the feeling is a problem to be solved rather than an experience to be processed.
It's the difference between standing next to someone in the hole and throwing a rope down from above. Standing next to them validates that the hole is dark and scary. Throwing the rope down just implies they should be climbing faster.
That is a perfect analogy. And this brings us to the professional side of things. Friends are vital, but they aren't surgeons. Sometimes you need a professional. There is often a debate about what works better, talk therapy or medication. People tend to camp out on one side. Pills are a crutch, or therapy is just paid complaining.
And the data is nuanced there too, right? It's not a binary choice.
Not at all. A meta-analysis published in Psychological Medicine looked at this extensively. For many people, especially with moderate depression, the combination of psychotherapy and medication yields the best outcomes. They work on different timelines and different pathways. Medication can help lift the biological fog, raise the baseline so you can function, while therapy rewires the cognitive patterns that keep you stuck.
It's like the medication gives you the energy to do the physical therapy, but the talk therapy is the actual exercise that strengthens the muscle.
Yes, and specifically modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT have been shown to be incredibly effective because they are about skill building. They aren't just venting. They teach you to catch those automatic negative thoughts, "I'm a burden, no one cares," and interrogate them. It's mental hygiene.
I want to circle back to the burden concept. That seems to be the #1 reason people give for staying silent. I don't want to burden my family. Everyone else has their own problems. It's this twisted form of altruism.
It is twisted because it assumes your loved ones would prefer your suffering to your honesty, and that is rarely true. Think about the people you love. If they were in pain, would you want them to hide it from you? Would you feel burdened if they asked for help? Or would you feel honored that they trusted you?
I'd be devastatingly angry if they hid it. I'd feel like I failed them.
So why do we assume the rules are different for us? That is the depression talking. It isolates you by convincing you that you are uniquely unlovable or uniquely difficult. Breaking that silence is an act of trust. It's saying, "I trust our relationship enough to believe it can handle my messy parts."
There is also a structural issue here. We live in a society that prizes autonomy above almost everything else. The self-made man, the independent woman. We view dependency as a regression. But you are arguing that dependency or interdependency is actually our biological baseline state.
Biology doesn't care about our cultural narratives of independence. Our nervous systems are open loops. We regulate each other. If I am anxious and I sit next to you and you are calm and present, my heart rate will actually slow down to match yours. It's called co-regulation. We physically cannot self-soothe entirely on our own. We need that external anchor. Denying that need isn't strength. It's physiological denial.
So, practically speaking, for the person listening who is in that cave right now, they understand the science, they hear the stats, but they are still paralyzed. What is the smallest possible step? Because call a therapist can feel like climbing Everest.
The smallest step is to drop the performance. You don't even have to ask for help yet. You just have to stop lying. The next time someone asks, "How are you?" instead of the reflex, "I'm fine," try something low stakes like, "Honestly, I'm having a rough week this week," or "I'm feeling a bit low today." You test the waters. You crack the door open an inch.
That lowers the barrier to entry. You aren't confessing your darkest secrets. You're just adjusting the status report.
Right. And you see who leans in. You see who can hold that inch of truth. Not everyone will be able to, and that's okay. But you are looking for the people who don't flinch. Once you find them, you can open the door a little wider.
And for those who feel they truly have no one in their immediate circle, because that is a reality for millions,
That is where the weak ties of community become vital, and where the internet, despite its flaws, can be a lifeline. Support groups, crisis lines like 988 in the US, online communities. There is a unique power in strangers. Sometimes it's easier to be honest with someone who has no stake in your daily life. The Me Too effect. Hearing a stranger describe your exact internal experience shatters shame faster than almost anything else.
It validates that you aren't crazy, you're just human. I want to touch on the workplace aspect of this before we wrap up. We spend a third of our lives at work, yet admitting mental struggle there is often seen as career suicide. Is that shifting at all?
Slowly, very slowly, we are seeing more companies offer EAPs, employee assistance programs, and mental health days. But the stigma remains. A recent study showed that while 88% of adults say mental health is nothing to be ashamed of, a huge chunk still worry that disclosing a condition would hurt their career prospects. So we have this cognitive dissonance. We support it in theory, but punish it in practice.
Which brings us back to courage. It shouldn't require courage to be sick, but right now it does. To be the one who says, I'm not okay in a professional setting is a radical act, but every time someone does it, they create a little more space for the next person.
That is the legacy of reaching out. You aren't just saving yourself. You are modeling survival for everyone watching you. You are proving that the fracture can heal, but only if you let someone set the bone.
We have covered the history, the neuroscience, the cultural deadlock, but it really comes down to that single moment of decision. To pick up the phone, to say the words. It is terrifying, but the alternative is a slow erosion of the self.
And the most important thing to remember is that the fear of the reaction is almost always worse than the reaction itself. People are generally kinder and more familiar with pain than we give them credit for. You are anticipating rejection, but you will likely find resonance.
Rachel, this has been a necessary conversation. Thank you for breaking down the walls.
Thank you, Jake. Just remember, healing begins when silence ends.
For everyone listening, if you heard your own story in this episode, take that small step. Drop the performance. Test the waters. You are not a burden. You are just human, and you don't have to walk this road alone. Take care of yourselves.